Welcome students to this session. This is part 1 of module 3 of unit 1, that is Introduction to Cost Accounting of the course Fundamentals of Cost Accounting. In this session, I will discuss classification of cost on the basis of elements of cost and traceability of cost. That is, this module will enable you to understand how costs are classified in a business enterprise on the basis of elements of cost and traceability of cost. As discussed by me in previous videos, cost accounting involves classification of cost. Classification of cost is the arrangement of items of cost in logical groups having regard to their nature or purpose. Classification of cost is the process of grouping the components of cost under a common designation on the basis of similarities of nature, attributes, or relations. In other words, it is the process of identification of each item and the systematic placement of like items together according to their common features. As per Cost Accounting Standard 1, costs are classified on the basis of elements of cost or on the basis of traceability, that is, identifiability of cost, or it may be classified on the basis of functions or on the basis of behavior, that is, variability. Cost may also be classified on the basis of how it is influenced by management decision making. Items of cost differ on the basis of their nature. The elements of cost can be classified in three broad categories, that is, material, labor, and expenses. These in turn are classified as direct cost and indirect cost. Indirect costs are referred to as overheads. Material cost is the cost of material of any nature used for the purpose of production of a product or rendering of a service. It includes cost of materials, freight inwards, taxes and duties, insurance, etc., directly attributable to acquisition of material but excluding the trade discounts, duty drawbacks and refunds on account of excise duty and VAT. Material cost may be subdivided as direct material cost and indirect material cost. Direct materials are those materials which can be identified in the product and can be conveniently measured and directly charged to the product. For example, wood in furniture making, fabric in garment making, rubber in tire, bricks in construction of a building, fruits in canning industry, and so on. It also includes materials specifically purchased for a specific job or process. For example, veneer in furniture making if it is purchased for a specific job. Direct materials also include primary packing materials like wrappings, cartons, boxes, etc. Thus, those materials which form the part of product directly and can be traced to making of any product are called as direct materials. Indirect materials are those materials which do not normally form a part of the finished product. That is, the costs of these materials cannot be directly attributed to a particular cost object. Indirect materials have been defined as materials which cannot be allocated but which can be apportioned to or absorbed by cost center or cost unit. For example, stores used for maintenance of machinery or factory building. Stores used by non-productive departments like powerhouse, boiler house, etc. Supplies such as paper, pens, notepads used in the office. Indirect materials also include the materials which, due to their cost being small, are not considered worthwhile to be treated as direct materials. For example, cost of nails used in furniture making. Indirect materials may be used at factory level, office level, or for selling and distribution purpose. Accordingly, it is referred to as factory overheads, office and administrative overheads, and selling and distribution overheads. Now coming to labor. The human effort required to convert the materials into finished product is called labor. Direct labor is one which can be conveniently identified or attributed wholly to a particular job, product, or process. In other words, it is the amount expended in converting raw materials into finished goods. Thus, it includes payment made to the labor engaged on the actual production of the product or in carrying out of an operation or process. It also includes payment made to the labor engaged in adding to the actual production by way of transportation of material, tool setting, supervision, maintenance, etc. Direct labor also includes the amount paid to inspectors, analysts, etc., specially required for such production. The labor or employee cost which cannot be directly attributed to a particular job, product, or process is called indirect labor. That is, wages of that labor which cannot be allocated but which can be apportioned to or absorbed by cost center or cost unit is known as indirect labor. In other words, wages paid to labor which are employed other than on production constitute indirect labor cost. Examples of such labor are supervisors and maintenance workers, labor employed in security office, staff employed in office, staff employed for selling and distribution. Indirect labor cost at factory level is referred to as factory overheads. At office level, it is referred to as office and administrative overheads. And indirect labor cost for selling and distribution is referred to as selling and distribution overheads. The expenses other than material and labor are called other expenses. Direct expenses are those expenses which can be directly allocated to a particular job, process, or product. Direct expenses are expenses relating to manufacture of a product or rendering of a service which can be identified or linked with the cost object. Examples of direct expenses are royalty on production, fees of experts specially hired for a particular job, expenses of designing or drawing of pattern or models, higher charges of special equipment, and so on. For example, in case of a construction company, fees paid to engineer for drawing of a plan, fees paid to architect, higher charges for hire of special equipment or machinery are considered as direct expenses if it can be directly allocated to a particular contract. As against these, indirect expenses are those expenses which cannot be directly allocated to a particular job, process, or product. Examples of indirect expenses at factory level are depreciation of machinery, factory rent, factory insurance, factory lighting, etc. At office level, indirect expenses includes office rent, office insurance, office lighting, depreciation on furniture, etc. At selling and distribution level, indirect expenses includes advertising, showroom expenses like rent, insurance, etc. Accordingly, they are referred to as factory overheads, office and administrative overheads, and selling and distribution overheads. Now coming to classification based on traceability or identifiability. This is already discussed by me under classification of cost according to elements. However, according to Cost Accounting Standard 1, by degree of traceability to the product, cost can be distinguished as direct cost and indirect cost. The direct costs are those which can be easily traceable to a product or cost unit or cost center or some specific activity. Direct cost may be with regard to materials, labor and expenses. For example, cost of wood for making furniture, wages paid to carpenter, fees paid to furniture designer are examples of direct material, direct labor and direct expenses respectively in case of a furniture making unit. Direct cost is also called as traceable cost. As against this, the indirect costs are difficult to trace to a single product or it is uneconomic to do so. They are common to several products. For example, cost of adhesive in furniture making, cost of nails in furniture making, salary of a factory manager and so on. It is also called as common cost. Indirect cost may further be with regard to materials, labor and expenses. Costs may be direct or indirect with respect to a particular division or department. For example, all the costs incurred in the powerhouse are indirect as far as the production department is concerned, but as regards the powerhouse itself, the fuel cost or supervisory salaries are direct. It is necessary to know the purpose for which cost is being ascertained and whether it is being associated with a product, department or some activity. Direct cost can be allocated directly to costing unit or cost center, whereas indirect costs have to be apportioned to different products if appropriate measurement techniques are not available. These may involve some formula or base which may not be totally correct or exact. To conclude, direct material, direct labor and direct expenses generally constitutes 50 to 80% of the total cost of the product. As such, it is primary to the cost of the product. The aggregate of direct material, direct labor and direct expenses is called prime cost. The aggregate of the cost of indirect material, indirect labor and indirect expenses are called as overheads or on costs. Overheads may be classified as factory or production overheads, office and administrative overheads and selling and distribution overheads. Now, which costs will come under production overheads, office overheads and selling and distribution overheads will be discussed by me in the next video. Thank you.